At 3 in the morning, when most folks are sound asleep, Liam Ortiz pushes his mop bucket through the empty corridors of Horizon Plastics. The 40-year-old janitor knows every inch of this factory floor, every burnt-out light bulb, and every loose wire that management keeps promising to fix. He's been working double shifts for 2 years now, ever since the hospital bills started piling up after his wife's passing. Every paycheck goes toward keeping his 9-year-old daughter Rosie in that private STEM program she loves so much. But tonight, something's different. The storm outside has been hammering the old electrical systems, and sparks are dancing where they shouldn't be. When a surge ignites a pallet of volatile chemicals, turning the factory into a potential bomb, Liam faces a choice that will change everything. Will he follow protocol and evacuate? Or will he risk everything to save not just the plant, but the entire neighborhood? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh buzzing cuts through the quiet of the small apartment at 5:30 a.m. Liam Ortiz reaches across the narrow bed, his calloused fingers finding the snooze button with practiced ease. The single bedroom he shares with his daughter Rosie feels smaller each morning, but it's home. The walls are decorated with her science fair ribbons and drawings of rockets reaching toward crayon stars. "Dad, you're going to be late for my presentation," comes a sleepy voice from the twin bed across the room. Rosie's dark hair fans across her pillow, but her eyes are already bright with anticipation. "Never missed one yet, sweetheart," Liam whispers back, pulling on yesterday's jeans. His movements are careful, deliberately a man who's learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. The kitchen counter holds a folded piece of paper he's read 100 times. Rosie's acceptance letter to the Westfield Academy STEM program. The scholarship covered 60%, but the remaining $4,000 might as well have been $4 million. The morning routine flows like clockwork. Rosie brushes her teeth while Liam packs her lunch, tucking in an apple and a note that reads, "You're going to change the world." She won't read it until noon, but he writes one every day. It's become their ritual, his way of believing in a future that seems impossibly bright from where they stand. "Tell me about your project again," he says, driving their 15-year-old Honda through the awakening suburbs. The engine makes a sound it didn't make last month, but the mechanic will have to wait until after the utility bills. "It's about renewable energy storage," Rosie explains, her hands moving as she talks. "See, the problem isn't making solar power, it's keeping it for when the sun's not shining. I designed a battery system using recycled materials from old phones and laptops." At 9 years old, she speaks with the precision of someone who's spent her evenings reading scientific journals instead of watching cartoons. Liam glances at her in the rearview mirror. Sometimes, when she talks about her inventions, he sees Maria's face, the same passionate intensity, the same belief that knowledge could solve any problem. His wife had been studying to become a renewable energy engineer when the cancer diagnosis came. She never got to finish her degree, but she'd spent her final months teaching Rosie everything she could about science and wonder. "Mom would have loved this project," he says softly. "I know, that's why I'm doing it." The school drop-off line moves slowly. Parents in expensive cars chat about vacation plans, while Liam checks his phone for the 3rd time. His supervisor at Horizon Plastics had texted about mandatory overtime, another double shift, another day of pushing through exhaustion for the sake of numbers on a paycheck. "Dad," Rosie's voice is smaller now, uncertain. "What if I don't win today?" He turns to face her fully. "Then you'll have learned something, and you'll try again tomorrow. That's what winners do, kiddo. They keep trying." She hugs him fierce and quick before disappearing into the school building, her backpack nearly as big as she is. Liam watches until she's safely inside, then sits in the parking lot for a moment longer than necessary. Some mornings, the weight of being everything to someone so brilliant feels overwhelming. The drive to Horizon Plastics takes him through the industrial district, where smokestacks reach toward grey clouds and the air tastes of progress and compromise. The factory squats like a concrete giant beside the interstate, its windows dark except for the security lights that burn 24 hours a day. Liam knows every corner of this place, every machine that hums and clatters through the night shift. He'd started here 3 years ago, when Maria's medical bills began arriving like storm clouds. The night janitor position paid better than day shift, and it meant he could be home when Rosie got out of school. He'd told himself it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But temporary had a way of becoming permanent when you were drowning in debt. The employee parking lot is half empty at 7 a.m. Most of the day shift workers won't arrive for another hour, but Liam needs to sleep before tonight's shift. He parks next to a rusted pickup truck that belongs to Eddie Morales, the maintenance supervisor who's been at Horizon since before Liam was born. "Morning, Eddie," he calls out, catching the older man as he heads toward the employee entrance. "Liam, good to see you. How's that little scientist of yours?" "Presenting her project today, renewable energy storage." Eddie whistles low. 9 years old and already smarter than the engineers who designed this place. "You raising the next Marie Curie there, my friend." They walk together toward the building, past the loading docks where morning deliveries are beginning to arrive. The factory operates on 3 shifts, but the night crew handles the most dangerous work mixing, the volatile resins and chemicals that become everything from car parts to medical devices during daylight hours. "You hear about the electrical issues in Section C?" Eddie asks, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Third time this month the breakers have tripped. I keep telling management we need to upgrade the whole system, but they say it's not in the budget." Liam knows Section C well. It's where the chemical storage happens, where pallets of flammable materials wait to be processed. The wiring there is original to the building 30-year-old copper that's been patched and repatched until it looks like electrical spaghetti. "They'll wait until something catches fire," he says. "Then they'll wish they'd listened to you. That's what I'm afraid of." Inside the factory, the morning shift is already setting up for the day. Liam nods to the workers he knows, exchanges quiet greetings with others who live similar lives, people who understand that sometimes you work 2 jobs to afford 1 life. The break room coffee is strong enough to wake the dead, which is exactly what he needs. His locker is in the basement, next to the time clock that tracks every minute of his working life. Inside, hanging beneath his spare uniform, is something he hasn't looked at in months. His old volunteer firefighter helmet. The yellow plastic is scarred and smoke-stained, a reminder of the man he used to be before life demanded different sacrifices. He joined the Riverside Volunteer Fire Department right after high school, drawn by the idea of helping people in their worst moments. For 15 years, he'd answered calls at all hours, trained every weekend, learned to think clearly when everything around him was burning. But when Maria got sick, something had to give. The volunteer work was the first thing to go. The helmet feels heavier than he remembers. He touches the department sticker on the front, faded but still readable. Courage, honor, service. Words that felt like prophecy when he was 25 and believed he could save the world 1 emergency at a time. "You coming to the union meeting Thursday?" asks Carmen Rodriguez, another night shift worker. She's been trying to organize better safety protocols, but management treats worker concerns like suggestions in a suggestion box acknowledged but ignored. "I'll try," Liam says, though they both know he probably won't. Between work and Rosie, there's barely time for sleep, let alone activism. The drive home takes him past Rosie's school again. Through the windows, he can see children working at lab tables, their faces bright with concentration. In a few hours, his daughter will stand in front of judges and explain her vision for a better world. He wishes he could be there, but the day shift starts when her presentation ends. The apartment is quiet when he returns. Rosie's breakfast dishes sit in the sink next to the coffee cup he'd abandoned in his rush to get her to school. On the refrigerator, beneath a magnet shaped like a test tube, is a drawing she'd made last week, a stick figure in a janitor's uniform with a cape, standing next to a little girl in a lab coat. The caption reads, "My dad the hero." He stares at the drawing for a long moment, wondering when he'd stopped feeling like a hero and started feeling like a man treading water. The bills scattered across the kitchen table tell the story of their struggles. Medical debt, credit card minimums, the endless math of survival. Even with the double shifts, they're barely breaking even. But there's hope in the small things. Rosie's grades, her excitement about science, the way she talks about the future, like it's something she can build with her own hands. She has Maria's brilliance and his determination, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Liam sets his alarm for 10 p.m. and falls asleep thinking about renewable energy storage and 9-year-old girls who believe they can change the world. Outside, storm clouds are gathering on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbles like a promise. At Horizon Plastics, the day shift hums along its predictable rhythm. In the boardroom on the executive floor, Evelyn Sterling sits at the head of a mahogany table that cost more than most people make in a year. The quarterly reports spread before her tell a story of steady profits and managed decline company that's successful enough to survive, but not innovative enough to thrive. The night shift numbers are acceptable, her operations manager is saying. Productivity is up 3% from last quarter. Evelyn nods, but her attention is elsewhere. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she can see the factory floor below, where people in identical uniforms move like pieces in a complex machine. She knows the numbers show many widgets they produce, how much profit each worker generates, how efficiently they convert raw materials into finished products. But she doesn't know their names, their stories, their dreams. Her father had built this company with different values. Daniel Sterling had started Horizon Plastics with a handshake and a promise to treat workers like family. But that was before global competition, before shareholders demanded quarterly growth, before the mathematics of modern business reduced human beings to line items on a spreadsheet. "What about the electrical issues in Section C?" asks Tom Morrison, the facilities director. "Eddie Morales has been pushing for upgrades." "What's the cost?" Evelyn asks, though she already knows the answer will be too high. $200,000 for a complete rewiring. But we could patch the current system for about $30,000. "Patch it," she says, the words tasting bitter. "We'll revisit the full upgrade next fiscal year." The meeting continues, but Evelyn's mind wanders to the storm forecast. Severe thunderstorms are expected overnight, the kind that test aging infrastructure and reveal the weaknesses in systems that have been temporarily repaired too many times. She makes a mental note to review the insurance policies, just in case. As the afternoon wears on, the factory below begins its transition to night shift. Liam Ortiz arrives at his usual time, looking tired but determined. Evelyn has seen him in the monthly reports, reliable, never absent, never complained, the kind of employee who makes her job easier because he simply does what needs to be done. She wonders briefly what his story is. Then the phone rings with another crisis. Another decision that will affect the bottom line, and the moment passes. The night shift takes over, and Evelyn heads home to her empty penthouse, where the only sound is the echo of her own footsteps. Neither of them knows that in a few hours their lives will intersect in ways that will challenge everything they believe about work, worth, and the courage to do what's right when everything is burning around them. The storm hits Horizon Plastics at 2:47 a.m. with the fury of nature unleashed. Lightning splits the sky in jagged silver lines, and thunder shakes the factory's steel frame like a giant's fist. Liam pauses in his mopping, watching through the rain-streaked windows as the parking lot floods with each flash of illumination. He's been on shift for 6 hours, moving methodically through the production areas, while the skeleton crew operates the overnight machinery. The chemical processing unit hums at half capacity, mixing tomorrow's batch of automotive-grade resins. Most of the workers are clustered in the break room, waiting for the storm to pass before resuming the more dangerous tasks. The first sign of trouble comes as a flicker in the overhead fluorescence. Then another. Liam looks up from his bucket, water dripping from his mop as the lights strobe in an erratic pattern. In Section C, where the volatile materials are stored, he can hear the electrical systems struggling against the storm's assault. "That don't sound right," mutters Jorge Valdez, the night shift foreman, appearing beside him with a steaming cup of coffee. "Been hearing pops and crackles from the main panel all evening." Before Liam can respond, a massive lightning strike illuminates the entire factory floor in stark white light. The thunder follows immediate close enough to feel in their chest cavities. Then, in the sudden silence that follows, they hear something that makes both men freeze, the sharp crack of an electrical surge, followed by the acrid smell of burning insulation. Section C, Jorge breathes, setting down his coffee cup so hard it sloshes onto the concrete floor. They move together toward the chemical storage area, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The smell grows stronger with each step, not just electrical burning now, but something chemical and wrong. Through the chain-link barrier that separates the storage area from the main floor, they can see sparks dancing along the overhead conduit like deadly fireflies. "Jesus Christo," Jorge whispers, fumbling for his radio. "We need to evacuate, now." But Liam is already moving, his mind shifting into a gear he hasn't used in years. The volunteer firefighter training kicks in like muscle memory. Assess, prioritize, act. He scans the storage area with new eyes, cataloging the dangers. 50-gallon drums of acetone, pallets stacked high with polyethylene pellets, containers of hardening agents that become explosive when heated. "Jorge, how many people are in the building?" 12 on this shift. Why? Another surge races along the electrical conduits, and this time they see the spark that changes everything. It arcs from a junction box directly onto a wooden pallet loaded with resin containers. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then flame blooms like an orange flower, spreading across the pallet with terrifying speed. "Call 911, Liam shouts, already moving toward his locker. "And hit the evacuation alarm." "Where are you going?" "To get something." The alarm begins wailing as Liam sprints through the corridors he knows by heart. Workers emerge from break rooms and equipment stations, confusion written on their faces as supervisors shout orders over the noise. The evacuation procedure is simple. Exit through the nearest door and gather in the parking lot. No one stays behind, no exceptions. But Liam isn't thinking about procedures anymore. He's thinking about the residential neighborhood that sits less than a quarter-mile from Section C. About apartment buildings filled with sleeping families, including children like Rosie, who trust that adults will keep them safe. About what happens when volatile chemicals reach their ignition point in an enclosed space. His locker hangs open, and there it is, his old firefighter helmet, yellow plastic scarred by heat and time. He lifts it with hands that remember its weight, its purpose. The department sticker on the front catches the emergency lighting. Courage, honor, service. He puts it on. The evacuation is proceeding smoothly when Liam returns to Section C. Most of the workers are already heading for the exits, following Jorge's shouted directions. But the fire has grown in the few minutes he was gone. What started as flames on a single pallet has spread to the adjacent storage area, and the heat is building pressure in the sealed chemical containers. "Liam," Jorge calls out, seeing him approach the chain-link barrier. "What are you doing? We need to go." "Look at it, Jorge, really look." The foreman follows Liam's gaze and sees what the janitor has already calculated. The fire is spreading in a direct line toward the main chemical storage tanks, industrial quantities of flammable solvents that could turn the entire building into a bomb. Beyond that, the residential area where 800 people sleep in their beds, trusting that nothing bad will happen in the dark hours before dawn. "The fire department won't get here in time," Liam says quietly. "And even if they do, they won't know the layout like we do. Man, this is crazy. We follow protocol. We evacuate. Protocol assumes the fire department can handle it. But look," Liam points to the spreading flames. "It's moving toward the main tanks. If those blow, it won't matter how far we ran." Jorge stares at the fire, his face pale in the orange light. He's worked at Horizon for 15 years, raised 3 kids on the wages this place provides. He knows every pipe, every valve, every shortcut that management has taken to save money. He also knows what Liam isn't saying, that the sprinkler system in Section C has been temporarily offline for maintenance for the past 6 months. The manual sprinkler controls, Jorge says suddenly. If someone could reach them. Where? Far side of Section C, past the main storage tanks. But the smoke. Liam is already moving toward the section door, checking the simple filter mask he keeps in his back pocket. It won't protect him for long, but it might be enough. Behind him, Jorge makes a decision that will haunt him for years. He doesn't try to stop him. The heat hits Liam like a physical blow when he opens the section door. The fire has found the chemical-soaked wooden pallets and is feeding hungrily, growing stronger by the minute. Smoke churns toward the ceiling, but the lower air is still breathable if he stays low. He moves forward in a crouch, the helmet protecting his head from falling debris. The volunteer training comes back in fragments. Stay oriented, conserve air, keep moving. The manual sprinkler controls are mounted on the far wall, next to the main electrical panel that started this nightmare, 60 feet away through smoke and flame. Halfway there, his phone buzzes. A text message from Rosie, sent from her bedroom where she should be sleeping. Can't sleep. Storm is scary. Love you, Dad. Liam stops, crouched behind a concrete pillar, and stares at the message. His daughter is awake, probably looking out her window toward the industrial district where orange light is beginning to flicker against the clouds. In a few minutes, if he turns around and follows protocol, she might be looking at something very different. He texts back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." Then he puts the phone away and keeps moving. The manual controls are exactly where Jorge said they'd be, but the electrical fire has damaged the automatic systems. Liam studies the maze of pipes and valves, trying to remember everything Eddie Morales had explained about the building's water systems during their coffee break conversations. The main water line is intact, but he needs to create pressure and bypass the failed electronic controls. Working by feel and instinct, he begins opening valves in sequence, hearing the whisper of water beginning to move through pipes that haven't carried it in months. The fire has spread to within 20 feet of his position, and the heat is becoming unbearable. His filter mask is already clogged with smoke and chemical residue. Then he sees it, a length of maintenance cable and an emergency water valve that's designed to flood the entire section in case of catastrophic failure. It's the kind of solution that requires destroying the electrical systems to save the building, the sort of desperate measure that only makes sense when everything else has failed. Liam wraps the cable around the valve wheel and throws his full weight against it. The ancient metal resists, then gives way with a grinding screech. Water erupts from overhead sprinklers that haven't worked in months, cascading down in sheets that turn the air to steam and beat the flames back from the storage tanks. He doesn't see Jorge filming through the window with his phone, capturing the moment when a night janitor becomes something larger than himself. He doesn't know that the footage will be uploaded to social media before the fire department arrives, or that by morning, his smoke-stained face will be viewed by millions of people who need to believe that ordinary heroes still exist. All he knows is the relief of water falling like rain, the hiss of flames dying, and the knowledge that 800 sleeping people will wake up safe in their own beds. As consciousness fades and smoke overwhelms his improvised protection, Liam's last thought is of Rosie's text message and the promise he'd made. Everything's going to be okay. The fire department finds him collapsed beside the sprinkler controls, his yellow helmet still protecting a head full of dreams about 9-year-old girls who want to change the world. The fire is out. The building is saved. And in the parking lot where workers wait for the all-clear, everyone is asking the same question. Who was that guy in the helmet? By dawn, the whole world will know his name. Consciousness returns to Liam in fragments, the antiseptic smell of the hospital, the steady beep of monitors, and the weight of his daughter's small hand wrapped around his fingers. His throat feels like he'd swallowed sandpaper, and every breath carries the metallic taste of smoke and chemicals. "Dad," Rosie's voice is barely a whisper, thick with tears she's been holding back. "The doctor said you're going to be okay." He tries to speak, but only manages a hoarse croak. The oxygen mask over his face fogs with each breath, and when he moves to adjust it, every muscle in his body protests. Through the hospital room window, he can see the first grey light of dawn painting the sky. "The fire," he manages to whisper. "Is out," says a familiar voice from the doorway. Jorge Valdez steps into the room, his work clothes still smudged with soot. "You did it, hermano. Building still standing, and everybody went home safe." The memories come flooding back. The electrical surge, the spreading flames, the desperate improvisation with the sprinkler system. But there's something in Jorge's expression that suggests there's more to the story, something Liam doesn't yet understand. "How long was I?" 6 hours, Jorge says. "Paramedics got you out around 3:30. Smoke inhalation, some minor burns, but the doctors say you'll be fine." He pauses, glancing at Rosie before continuing. "Liam, there's something you need to know about what happened after." A nurse enters with a clipboard and the kind of brisk efficiency that comes from years of managing other people's crises. She checks his vitals, adjusts his oxygen flow, and makes notes that will become part of his permanent medical record. More bills, Liam thinks automatically. More debt to add to the pile. "Mr. Ortiz, you're very lucky," she says. "Another few minutes in that smoke and we'd be having a different conversation. The fire chief wants to speak with you when you're feeling up to it." After she leaves, Jorge pulls out his phone with the reverence of someone handling a holy relic. "You remember me filming through the window? Well, I posted it online around 4 this morning. Just wanted to show people what you did, you know. Figured maybe a few of our friends would see it." He hands the phone to Liam, who stares at the screen with growing disbelief. The video shows a figure in a yellow helmet moving through smoke-filled chaos, working frantically at the sprinkler controls while flames dance around him. The footage is grainy and dark, but there's something undeniably heroic about the silhouette against the fire. Below the video, numbers scroll past too quickly to comprehend. Views, shares, comments, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, climbing steadily as he watches. "Jorge, how many people have seen this?" "Last I checked, 2 million, and that was an hour ago." Rosie squeezes his hand tighter. "Dad, you're famous. Everyone at school is talking about it. Mrs. Peterson showed the video in science class and told everyone you're my father." The words don't quite register. Famous feels like something that happens to other people, movie stars and politicians and lottery winners, not tonight janitors who just did what needed doing. But the evidence is there on the screen, comment after comment from strangers who've been moved by 30 seconds of grainy phone footage. Hero doesn't even begin to cover it. This man saved hundreds of lives. Where's the medal? Where's the parade? Companies need to treat workers like this better. The last comment hits differently than the others, and Liam scrolls up to see more like it. People aren't just praising his actions, they're asking questions about why a janitor had to risk his life because safety systems failed. About why someone making minimum wage had to be the one with enough courage to stay behind. Dr. Sarah Chen enters the room with the measured pace of someone who's delivered both good news and bad news too many times to rush either one. She's young, probably fresh out of residency, but her eyes hold the kind of compassion that made her choose medicine over easier paths. "Mr. Ortiz, I'm Dr. Chen. How are you feeling?" "Like I swallowed a campfire." She smiles. "That's about what I'd expect. Your chest x-rays look good, no permanent damage to your lungs. The burns on your hands are superficial and should heal completely. You were very fortunate. When can I go home?" "I'd like to keep you for observation until this afternoon. Make sure there are no complications from the smoke inhalation." She pauses, consulting her tablet. "I understand you don't have health insurance through your employer." The familiar weight settles on Liam's chest, heavier than smoke, more burning than flames. "I'm on the basic plan, high deductible." "I see. Well, let's focus on getting you healthy first. We'll work out the financial details later. After she leaves, the room falls quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the monitors. Rosie has fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, exhausted by a night of worry and excitement. Jorge checks his phone again, his eyebrows rising. 3 million views now, and it's not just regular people watching. News stations are picking it up. Channel 7 wants to interview you. I don't want to be interviewed. Liam, listen to me. This is bigger than you think. People are calling you a hero, and maybe they're right. But more than that, they're starting to ask questions about Horizon, about safety, about how we treat working people. This could change things. Through the window, Liam can see the industrial district, where Horizon Plastics sits like a concrete monument to efficiency over safety. Somewhere in that building, the day shift is probably cleaning up the damage from the night before, and management is calculating the cost of repairs against the cost of doing nothing. The jerry-rigged sprinkler bypass he'd created in desperation had worked, but it was never meant to be a permanent solution. It was the kind of improvisation born from necessity, using maintenance cables and emergency valves to compensate for systems that should have been properly maintained years ago. The fact that it worked at all was more luck than engineering. What happens now, he asks. To the factory, I mean. Eddie Morales is already talking about using this to push for real safety upgrades. Says management can't ignore what happened, not with the whole world watching. A soft knock at the door interrupts them. A woman in an expensive suit enters, carrying a leather portfolio and the kind of confidence that comes from always being the smartest person in the room. She's in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seem to catalogue everything they see. Mr. Ortiz, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I was hoping we could talk. Jorge stands up straighter, suddenly aware of his soot-stained work clothes. But Liam just feels tired bone, deep exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with smoke inhalation. I don't really want to be on TV. I understand. But your story is inspiring people. The video of your rescue has been shared by everyone from local firefighters to the governor's office. People want to know who you are, what motivated you to risk everything for people you've never met. I didn't think about motivation. There was a fire, and somebody needed to put it out. Jennifer Walsh smiles, and Liam realizes that's exactly the kind of answer she was hoping for. That's what makes it so remarkable. You saw a problem and you solved it, regardless of the personal cost. In an age of cynicism, you've reminded people that heroes are real. She sets her portfolio on the bedside table and pulls out a tablet showing social media feeds. The video is everywhere now, shared and reshared across platforms Liam has never heard of. But it's the comments that catch his attention, not just praise for his actions, but genuine curiosity about his life, his struggles, his daughter's dreams. The network wants to do a full feature, your background, your family, what led to this moment. We're calling it Ordinary Heroes. No, the word comes out harder than Liam intended. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I just want to go home, take care of my daughter, go back to work. Mr. Ortiz, with respect, I don't think going back to normal is going to be an option. You've started something here, whether you meant to or not. The question is whether you want to help shape the conversation or let others control it. Rosie stirs in her chair, her eyes opening slowly. When she sees the news reporter, she sits up straighter, suddenly awake and alert. Are you here about my dad? I am. You must be very proud of him. I always was, Rosie says simply, even before everyone else figured out he was special. The words hit Liam like a physical blow. In all his worry about bills and double shifts and providing for their future, he'd somehow missed the most important truth, that he was already a hero in the eyes of the person who mattered most. Jennifer Walsh seems to sense the shift in the room's emotional temperature. I'll leave my card, she says gently. When you're ready to tell your story, and you will be, because the world needs to hear it, please call me. After she leaves, the room feels different, smaller, but also more significant. Jorge shows them more video clips from news broadcasts, interviews with his co-workers, even a statement from the fire chief praising his extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. But it's a text message from Eddie Morales that changes everything. Evelyn Sterling wants to see you. Owner called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Think she wants to thank you personally. Liam stares at the message, trying to process what it means. In 3 years at Horizon Plastics, he's never seen Evelyn Sterling in person, only glimpsed her occasionally through the boardroom windows. A distant figure, making decisions that affected his life, without ever knowing his name. This is good, Jorge says. Really good. Maybe she'll finally listen about the safety upgrades. But Liam isn't thinking about safety upgrades or corporate meetings. He's thinking about the improvised sprinkler bypass he'd created in desperation, and whether a solution born from emergency can become the foundation for something permanent. Whether one night of extraordinary circumstances can translate into lasting change for ordinary people. Outside the hospital window, the sun climbs higher into a sky that looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. But something fundamental has shifted in the world, and Liam Ortiz, night janitor, single father, accidental heroist, about to discover that sometimes the most powerful force for change comes from people who never intended to change anything at all. By the time Liam is discharged from the hospital that afternoon, the viral video has taken on a life of its own. Jorge's grainy footage has been enhanced, analyzed, and transformed into something approaching legend. News vans line the hospital parking lot, and reporters shout questions as he walks slowly toward his Honda, still wearing the hospital-issued shirt because his work clothes were destroyed by smoke and chemicals. Mr. Ortiz, how does it feel to be called a hero? Will you be returning to work at Horizon Plastics? What do you want people to learn from your story? Liam keeps his head down, one arm around Rosie's shoulders, as Jorge helps clear a path through the crowd. The attention feels surreal, like something happening to someone else while he watches from a distance. All he wants is to go home, to sit in his small apartment and pretend the world hasn't suddenly decided to care about a night janitor from the industrial district. But the world has other plans. The first sign that everything has changed comes at the grocery store, where the clerk recognizes him from the video and refuses to let him pay for milk and bread. Heroes don't buy their own groceries, she says with tears in her eyes. My brother's a firefighter in Detroit. He says what you did was as brave as anything he's seen in 20 years. The second sign comes when they arrive home to find their landlord, Mr. Peterson, waiting by the mailboxes with an envelope in his hand. For 3 years, Liam has lived in terror of unexpected visits from the man who controls their housing situation. But instead of an eviction notice, Peterson hands him a handwritten note. Saw the video, the older man says gruffly. My grandson showed it to me on his computer, says you saved a whole neighborhood. He clears his throat, uncomfortable with sentiment. Rent's paid through the end of the year. Consider it a thank you from someone who might have lost his house if that factory had blown up. Upstairs in their apartment, Liam sits on the couch and stares at the note until the words blur together. 12 months of housing security, a gift so enormous he can't quite process it. For the first time in years, he won't have to choose between Rosie's education and keeping a roof over their heads. Dad, look at this. Rosie has his phone, scrolling through social media with the native fluency of her generation. Someone started a GoFundMe page for us. They've raised $4,000 already. For what? Medical bills, they said. And to help with everything else. She looks up at him, her 9-year-old face serious beyond its years. People really want to help us. The phone rings their landline, which nobody ever calls except collection agencies and telemarketers. Rosie answers it with the careful politeness he's taught her, then holds it out with wide eyes. It's the governor's office. The conversation that follows feels like something from a dream. The governor's aide explains that they want to present Liam with a state commendation for heroism. There will be a ceremony, media coverage, a chance to meet with state legislators about workplace safety reform. The aide speaks with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who orchestrates public relations for a living. I appreciate the thought, Liam says, but I'm not really a public speaking kind of person. Mr. Ortiz, with respect, you've become a symbol. The video of your rescue has been viewed 50 million times in the last 18 hours. People see you as proof that ordinary Americans are capable of extraordinary things. The governor believes your story could inspire meaningful change. After he hangs up, Liam sits in the kitchen where he's calculated bills and worried about the future for 3 years. The acceptance letter for Rosie's STEM program is still tucked under a magnet on the refrigerator, but now it represents something different. Not a financial burden they can barely afford, but a dream that's suddenly within reach. "What are you thinking about?" Rosie asks, settling beside him with her homework. "I'm thinking about your mother, about what she would have thought of all this. She would have been proud, but not surprised." Rosie opens her science textbook to a chapter about chemical reactions. "She always said you had the biggest heart of anyone she'd ever met. That's why she married you." The memory hits him with unexpected force. Maria, in her hospital bed, weak from chemotherapy but determined to make him promise something. "Take care of our little scientist," she'd whispered, "but don't forget to take care of yourself too. The world needs good people like you." At the time, he'd thought she meant he should find someone else eventually, maybe remarry when the grief became manageable. But now he wonders if she saw something he'd missed, that taking care of himself might mean accepting that he was worth taking care of, that his life had value beyond the paychecks he brought home. The phone rings again. This time it's Eddie Morales, calling from the factory. "Liam, you need to get down here. Evelyn Sterling wants to meet with you, and she's not taking no for an answer. She's been in the building for 3 hours, walking around the damage, talking to everyone who was there last night." "What's she like?" "Different than I expected. Quiet. Asking a lot of questions about safety protocols and equipment maintenance. I think what happened really shook her up. I'll be there in an hour." The drive to Horizon Plastics takes him through neighborhoods where people wave from their front porches and children hold up hand-drawn signs that say, "Thank you, hero." The industrial district looks different in daylightless, imposing, more fragile. The factory sits like a concrete ship in a sea of parking lots, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Inside, the building still smells faintly of smoke and chemicals. The day shift workers look up as he passes, their faces showing a mixture of respect and curiosity. Some shake his hand, others just nod. Carmen Rodriguez hugs him fierce and quick, whispering, "Gracias, hermano," before returning to her station. Section C has been cordoned off while safety inspectors document the damage. Through the yellow tape, Liam can see his improvised sprinkler bypass still in place, tangle of cables and manual valves that looks even more desperate in daylight than it had in the darkness. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Sometimes, he thinks, the impossible becomes inevitable when there's no other choice. "Mr. Ortiz?" He turns to find a woman in her 40s approaching, dressed in dark slacks and a simple blouse that probably cost more than he makes in a month. But her face shows genuine exhaustion, and her eyes hold something he hadn't expected, gratitude mixed with what might be shame. "I'm Evelyn Sterling. I own this place." She extends her hand, and her grip is firm, calloused. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did and to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For the conditions that made your heroism necessary, for the safety shortcuts, the deferred maintenance, the decisions that put you in an impossible position." She gestures toward Section C. "That sprinkler system has been offline for 6 months. We kept saying we'd fix it next quarter, next budget cycle. We treated it like an acceptable risk." They walk together toward the break room, past workers who pretend not to stare. Evelyn moves through her own factory like a visitor, stopping to read safety notices and equipment logs with the concentration of someone seeing them for the first time. "The video," she says quietly. "I've watched it probably 100 times since this morning. There's this moment where you could have turned around, followed protocol, saved yourself. But you didn't. Why?" Liam thinks about the question, about all the easy answers he could give. But something in her expression suggests she deserves honesty, even if it's complicated. "I thought about my daughter waking up tomorrow morning, about having to explain why I chose the safe thing instead of the right thing, and I couldn't live with that conversation. Evelyn stops walking. For a moment, she just stands in the middle of the factory floor, surrounded by the machinery and systems that have made her fortune. When she speaks again, her voice is barely audible over the industrial noise. My father built this company with different values. He knew every worker's name, went to their children's graduations, treated people like family instead of resources. But that was before global competition, before shareholders demanded maximum efficiency. She looks directly at him. I've spent 15 years optimizing this place into something he wouldn't recognize, something that almost got you killed. They reach the break room, where a cluster of workers pretends to focus on vending machine selections, while obviously listening to every word. Evelyn seems to notice them for the first time, really notice them, as if they're people instead of line items on a budget report. What would it take, she asks, to make this place safe, really safe, not just legally compliant? Eddie Morales materializes beside them with a folder thick with documentation. I've been trying to get management to listen for 5 years. Complete electrical upgrade, modern fire suppression, updated chemical storage protocols. About $2 million total. $2 million. Evelyn repeats the number like she's tasting it. What do we spend on executive bonuses annually? Around $3 million, Eddie says quietly. The silence that follows carries weight, the kind of silence that precedes decisions that change everything. Liam watches Evelyn's face, seeing something shift behind her eyes. The viral video has made him temporarily famous, but real change requires someone with the power to write checks and issue orders. I want a complete safety audit by the end of the week, she says, her voice carrying new authority. Independent contractors, full transparency, and I want a proposal for every upgrade we've been deferring. Every single one. Mrs. Sterling. And I want Mr. Ortiz consulted on all of it. He understands this place better than any of us, and he's proven he has better judgment about what really matters. The words hang in the air like smoke from the extinguished fire. Liam realizes that the viral video isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. That sometimes the most important changes start with one person, refusing to accept that things have to stay the way they've always been. Outside, the news vans are waiting to capture his response to whatever happens next. But inside, surrounded by the workers who've become his extended family and the owner who's rediscovering her father's values, Liam Ortiz understands that he's become something he never intended to be. Not just a hero, but a catalyst for the kind of change that happens when ordinary people refuse to accept ordinary circumstances. The jerry-rigged sprinkler bypass still hangs in Section C like a monument to desperate ingenuity. Tomorrow, it will be replaced by proper equipment. But tonight, it stands as proof that sometimes the most important solutions come from people who never stopped believing that broken things can be fixed if someone cares enough to try. The emergency board meeting convenes at 6 p.m. in Horizon Plastics Executive Conference Room, a space that normally hosts quarterly reviews and budget presentations. Tonight, it feels more like a war room, with laptops displaying social media metrics and financial projections scattered across the mahogany table. The viral video plays on the wall-mounted screen for the third time in an hour, each viewing revealing new details that complicate the corporate response. Evelyn Sterling sits at the head of the table, studying the faces of the 6 board members who've been summoned on 12 hours' notice. These are people who've known her since she took over the company, investment partners, industry veterans, the kind of executives who measure success in quarterly earnings and market share. They've tolerated her father's legacy values as long as profits remain steady, but tonight's conversation will test loyalties that have been building for 15 years. The public relations impact is unprecedented, says Marcus Webb, the company's communications director. His presentation fills the screen with charts showing media mentions, sentiment analysis, and engagement metrics that would be impressive for a Super Bowl commercial. 50 million views in 24 hours, the hashtag #OrdinaryHero is trending globally. What's our exposure? asks board member Patricia Hoffman, a woman whose pharmaceutical company survived 3 major recalls through aggressive legal strategies. Insurance claims, regulatory scrutiny, potential lawsuits. Minimal, surprisingly, responds Tom Morrison from facilities. The fire was contained, no injuries besides Ortiz's smoke inhalation, and the state inspector's preliminary report shows we were technically in compliance with safety regulations. Technically, Evelyn repeats, her voice carrying an edge that makes several board members shift in their chairs. The real issue, continues Marcus, is managing the narrative. Right now, public sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. Americans love a blue-collar hero story. But that could change quickly if questions arise about why our safety systems failed in the first place. Richard Caldwell, the senior board member whose investment firm holds 20% of Horizon's shares, leans forward with the deliberate movement of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I've been in damage control mode all day, fielding calls from our institutional investors. The consensus is clear. We spin this as a feel-good story, present Ortiz with a modest reward, and return to business as usual. Any deviation from that approach risks turning positive publicity into regulatory scrutiny. Evelyn's gaze shifts to the portrait hanging behind her chair, her father, Daniel, captured in oil paint during Horizon's early years when the company employed 50 people instead of 500. In the painting, he's standing beside the original production line, his hand resting on the shoulder of a worker whose name he undoubtedly knew. The values embedded in that gesture feel like ancient history in this sterile boardroom. What kind of modest reward are we talking about? She asks. $50,000, says Patricia Hoffman. Enough to seem generous without setting precedent for future incidents. We frame it as appreciation for his dedication, not compensation for heroism. And we emphasize that his actions, while admirable, violated company safety protocols. Adds Marcus, we can't have employees thinking they should ignore evacuation orders, even with good intentions. The words settle over the room like a suffocating blanket. Evelyn looks around the table at faces that reflect 15 years of quarterly earnings calls and shareholder meetings, people who've forgotten that behind every budget line item is a human being with mortgage payments and medical bills and children who believe their parents are heroes. I visited the factory this afternoon, she says quietly. Talked to the workers who were there that night. Do you know what they told me? The board members exchange glances, clearly uncomfortable with this deviation from standard crisis management protocols. They told me about Liam Ortiz working double shifts to pay for his daughter's education, about the medical debt from his wife's cancer treatment, about choosing between groceries and car repairs, between rent and prescriptions. Her voice gains strength. They told me about a man who's been invisible to us for 3 years, mopping our floors while we debated whether to spend $30,000 on electrical upgrades that might have prevented this entire situation. Evelyn, Richard says carefully, emotional responses rarely lead to sound business decisions. Our obligation is to shareholders, not individual employees. Our obligation, she counters, is to run a company that reflects some basic human decency. When did we become the kind of people who pass the value of courage based on quarterly projections? She stands and walks to the window, overlooking the factory floor, where the night shift is beginning their routines. Down there, real people are doing real work to support real families, while up here, executives debate how to minimize the cost of gratitude. I've been thinking about something my father used to say. Profit without purpose is just organized greed. We've been very good at the profit part, but we've lost sight of everything else. Your father built this company in a different era, Patricia points out, before global competition, before efficiency metrics, before shareholders demanded maximum returns. Sentiment doesn't pay salaries or fund pensions. Neither does bankruptcy, Evelyn replies. And that's where we're headed if we keep treating our workforce like expendable resources instead of the foundation of our success. She returns to her seat and opens a leather portfolio that's been sitting untouched throughout the meeting. Inside are documents she's been reviewing since dawn: financial reports, safety audits, employee satisfaction surveys that paint a stark picture of a company that's optimized itself into moral bankruptcy. Here's what I learned today. Our worker turnover rate is 40% annually. Training costs are through the roof because we can't retain experienced employees. Our safety incidents have increased 20% over the past 3 years, and our insurance premiums reflect that reality. We're so focused on short-term cost savings that we're bleeding money on the things that actually matter. Marcus pulls up another presentation on his laptop. Evelyn, the public relations momentum is still positive. If we act quickly with a reasonable reward and some modest safety improvements, we can close this chapter and move forward. But if we overreact, the word comes out sharper than she intended. A man risked his life to save our facility because our safety systems failed. Our response is to calculate the minimum amount of gratitude that won't set a dangerous precedent. That's not crisis management, that's moral cowardice. The silence that follows carries the weight of 15 years of boardroom dynamics shifting in real time. These are people who've made careers out of managing risk and maximizing return, but they're confronting something that doesn't fit neatly into spreadsheet cells. The possibility that doing the right thing might also be good business. What exactly are you proposing? Richard asks, his tone suggesting he already suspects the answer will be expensive. Evelyn reaches into her portfolio and pulls out a single sheet of paper blank, except for her signature at the bottom and the Horizon Plastics letterhead at the top. It's the kind of document that represents either visionary leadership or corporate suicide, depending on your perspective. I'm proposing we give Liam Ortiz a blank check to redesign our safety systems, not as a reward for heroism, but as recognition that he understands this facility better than any consultant we could hire. He spent 3 years learning every pipe, every wire, every potential failure point. Who better to tell us how to fix what's broken? That's insane, Patricia breathes. You can't hand operational control to a janitor. Why not? Our engineers and facility managers created the conditions that nearly resulted in catastrophe. Maybe it's time to listen to someone who actually works with the consequences of our decisions. Tom Morrison shifts uncomfortably. Evelyn, there are regulatory requirements, insurance considerations, professional liability issues, all of which can be addressed through proper oversight and collaboration. I'm not suggesting we abandon professional standards. I'm suggesting we combine institutional knowledge with real-world experience. She places the blank check in the center of the table, where it sits like a challenge to everything the board has believed about corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility. Around the room, calculators are running mental math on the potential cost of undefined generosity. Furthermore, she continues, I want to establish profit sharing for all hourly employees, retroactive to the day they were hired. And I want to create scholarship funds for their children, starting with Rosie Ortiz's STEM program. The proposal lands like a physical blow. Richard Caldwell's face flushes red, and Patricia Hoffman reaches for her phone as if calling security. These are the kind of decisions that can trigger shareholder revolts and hostile takeover attempts. Evelyn, you're talking about fundamental changes to our compensation structure without board approval, Richard says, his voice tight with controlled anger. Changes that could cost millions and set precedents we can't sustain long term. I'm talking about treating our employees like human beings instead of production units. About building the kind of company my father would recognize, where workers share in the success they help create. She looks again at her father's portrait, remembering conversations from her childhood about the responsibility that comes with power. Daniel Sterling had built Horizon Plastics on the belief that business could be both profitable and humane, that success measured solely in dollars was ultimately meaningless. The video of Liam's rescue has been viewed by 50 million people, she says. They're not just watching 30 seconds of heroism, they're seeing what happens when ordinary workers are pushed beyond reasonable limits by systems that value efficiency over safety. If we respond with calculated minimalism, we'll confirm every criticism about corporate indifference. Marcus clears his throat. The reputational risks of appearing too generous are significant. It could signal weakness to competitors, encourage similar demands from other facilities. Or it could demonstrate that we're the kind of company that inspires loyalty instead of resignation, that we understand the difference between cost and investment, between expense and value. The debate continues for another hour, with charts and projections and risk assessments that try to quantify the unquantifiable. But the blank check remains in the center of the table, representing a choice between the easy path of managed generosity and the uncertain territory of genuine transformation. Finally, as the sun sets over the industrial district and the night shift settles into their routines, Evelyn stands and retrieves the check. The board members watch with the fascination of witnesses to either corporate evolution or corporate suicide. "I'm calling a shareholders' meeting for next week," she announces. "We'll present our response to this situation and let the ownership decide our direction. But until then, this check represents our values not as calculated public relations, but as recognition that some things matter more than quarterly earnings." As the board members file out, muttering about fiduciary responsibility and succession planning, Evelyn remains alone with her father's portrait. The oil paint seems to capture something that's been missing from too many boardroom meetings, the understanding that behind every business decision are real people with real dreams, and that sometimes the most profitable path is also the most humane. Tomorrow, she'll drive to Liam Ortiz's apartment and hand him a blank check that represents more than money. It represents the possibility that broken systems can be repaired by people brave enough to reimagine what success really means. The knock on Liam's apartment door comes at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, interrupting the weekend routine he's built around Rosie's science projects and catching up on sleep. Through the peephole, he sees a woman in dark slacks and a simple blouse, holding what appears to be an envelope. It takes him a moment to recognize Evelyn Sterling without the corporate setting of the factory. "Mrs. Sterling." He opens the door, suddenly conscious of his worn bathrobe and the breakfast dishes scattered across the small kitchen table. "Is everything okay? May I come in? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Rosie appears from her bedroom, dressed in pajamas, decorated with periodic table elements, her hair still messy from sleep. She recognizes Evelyn from the news coverage and stands straighter, as if visiting royalty. "You're the lady who owns Dad's work," she says with 9-year-old directness. "I am, and you must be Rosie. I've heard wonderful things about your science projects." The apartment suddenly feels even smaller, with Evelyn Sterling standing in the living room, her presence making the second-hand furniture and patched walls more obvious. But there's something unexpected in her demeanor, not the corporate authority Liam had anticipated, but something closer to nervousness. "Can I offer you coffee?" he asks. "It's not fancy, but it's strong." "That would be nice, thank you." As he prepares coffee in the tiny kitchen, Liam watches her examine the drawings and certificates that cover their refrigerator. Rosie's artwork, honor roll notifications, the acceptance letter to the STEM program that started everything. Evelyn studies them with the concentration of someone trying to understand a foreign language. "Your daughter is remarkable," she says when he returns with 2 mismatched mugs. 9 years old and already thinking about renewable energy storage. That's graduate-level engineering concepts. She gets that from her mother. Maria was studying to be an engineer before. He stops, not wanting to burden a stranger with their personal tragedy. "Before she got sick," Evelyn finishes gently. "I read about that in the employee files yesterday. I'm sorry for your loss." They sit on the couch while Rosie returns to her bedroom to work on homework, leaving the adults to navigate whatever conversation has brought the owner of Horizon Plastics to their modest apartment on a weekend morning. "Mr. Ortiz, Liam, I owe you an apology," Evelyn begins. "Not just for the safety conditions that put you in danger, but for 3 years of not knowing your name, your story, your circumstances. I've been running a company full of people I've never really seen. You can't know everyone personally. It's a big operation. My father knew everyone. When this company had 50 employees, he knew their children's names, their birthday parties, their struggles and dreams. I convinced myself that was impossible with 500 workers, but the truth is, I stopped trying. I let efficiency metrics replace human connections. She reaches into her purse and pulls out an envelope, the same one Liam had glimpsed through the peephole. But instead of handing it to him, she holds it like it contains something fragile. After our board meeting last night, I realized that everything has to change. Not just safety protocols or equipment upgrades, but our fundamental approach to how we value the people who make our success possible. What happened at the board meeting? Evelyn's laugh carries no humor. I discovered that 15 years of focusing on shareholder value has surrounded me with people who think heroism should be rewarded with the minimum amount necessary to avoid negative publicity. They wanted to give you $50,000 and a handshake, then return to business as usual. $50,000 is a lot of money. Not compared to what you saved, not compared to what you're worth. She opens the envelope and pulls out a single sheet of paper. This is a blank check, Liam. I want you to redesign our safety systems, not just Section C, but the entire facility. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes to make sure no one else has to choose between following protocol and saving lives. Liam stares at the check, his signature already inked at the bottom, but the amount line empty. It's the kind of gesture that exists in movies and fairy tales, not in the real world of utility bills and medical debt. Mrs. Sterling, I appreciate this, but I'm not an engineer. I don't have the credentials. You have something better. You understand this place from the ground up. You've seen every shortcut, every deferred repair, every compromise we've made in the name of cost control. Who better to tell us what really needs fixing? Rosie emerges from her bedroom, drawn by the serious tone of adult conversation. She sees the check in her father's hands, and her eyes widen with the rapid calculation abilities that make her exceptional at mathematics. Is that real? She asks. Very real, Evelyn replies. I'm asking your father to help make his workplace safer for everyone. Like engineering consultation. Exactly like that. Rosie nods approvingly. Dad would be good at that. He notices things other people miss. Like when our neighbor's carbon monoxide detector was going off and everyone thought it was just a dead battery, but Dad knew to call the fire department. The story is news to Evelyn, but it fits the pattern she's beginning to understand about Liam Ortiza, man whose attention to detail and willingness to act on uncomfortable truths extends far beyond his job description. There's more, Evelyn continues, her voice gaining strength. I want to establish profit, sharing for all hourly employees, retroactive to your start date, and scholarship funds for workers' children starting with Rosie's STEM program. The words hang in the air like a promise too good to believe. Liam has spent 3 years calculating every expense, choosing between necessities, watching his daughter's potential constrained by financial limitations. The idea that those constraints might simply disappear feels impossible. Why? He asks. Why change everything because of one night, one video? Evelyn stands and walks to the window, overlooking the parking lot where children play on rust-stained playground equipment and families make do with less than enough. From her penthouse, she's never seen this view, the reality of working-class life that provides the foundation for her corporate success. Because that video showed me something I'd forgotten, that behind every employee ID number is a person capable of extraordinary things when they're treated with dignity instead of indifference. Your heroism didn't happen in spite of your circumstances, it happened because of your character. And if we're inspiring that kind of character, we should be celebrating it, not managing it. The board won't like this, Liam says quietly. The board represents old thinking. Quarterly profits over long-term sustainability, shareholder value over stakeholder investment. But markets reward companies that inspire loyalty, and loyalty comes from mutual respect, not calculated compensation. Rosie climbs onto the couch beside her father, studying the blank check with scientific curiosity. How much money is enough to fix everything? That's what your father is going to help us figure out, Evelyn replies. Safety isn't about spending the minimum amount to meet regulations, it's about creating systems that protect people even when everything goes wrong. Like redundancy in engineering, Rosie says, nodding. Multiple backup systems so failure in one area doesn't cause cascade collapse. Evelyn stares at the 9-year-old who just used graduate-level engineering terminology to describe corporate safety philosophy. Exactly like that. Maybe you should consult on our redesign too. The suggestion makes Rosie beam with pride, but Liam feels the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The blank check represents more than money, it represents trust, expectation, the possibility of fundamental change in how Horizon Plastics operates. What about the other workers, he asks. Carmen, Jorge, Eddie, they've been pushing for safety improvements for years. Shouldn't they be part of this? Absolutely. I want you to work with anyone you trust. Hire any consultants you need. Take as much time as necessary. This isn't about quick fixes or minimum compliance. It's about building something that reflects our values instead of just our profit margins. She stands to leave, but pauses at the door as if remembering something important. There's one more thing. The shareholders' meeting next week will determine whether these changes actually happen. Some board members think I've lost perspective, that emotional decisions will destroy shareholder value. They're not wrong about the costs. This will be expensive, and it will set precedents that change how we operate. What can I do to help? Tell your story. Not the heroic version the media loves, but the real story about working double shifts to afford your daughter's education, about choosing between medical bills and rent, about why safety systems matter to people who can't afford to work anywhere else. Help them understand that treating workers well isn't corporate charity, it's smart business. After she leaves, Liam sits on the couch with the blank check in his hands, trying to process the magnitude of what's just happened. 3 days ago, he was an invisible night janitor whose biggest worry was making rent. Now he's being asked to redesign a multi-million-dollar facility and represent working-class values in a corporate boardroom. Dad? Rosie's voice is small, uncertain. Are you scared? Terrified, he admits. This is bigger than anything I've ever done. But you'll do it anyway, right? Because people are counting on you? He thinks about Jorge filming through the window, about Carmen organizing union meetings in her spare time, about Eddie documenting safety violations that management ignored, about 500 workers who deserve better than deferred maintenance and acceptable risk. Yeah, sweetheart, I'll do it anyway. Outside, storm clouds are gathering again, not the violent thunderstorm that triggered the fire, but the steady grey clouds that bring change in the form of persistent rain. Liam folds the blank check carefully and places it on the kitchen table next to Rosie's homework, where it sits like a bridge between the life they've known and the future they're about to build. The next week will determine whether one man's courage can inspire systemic change, or whether corporate inertia will reduce heroism to a footnote in quarterly reports. But tonight, in a small apartment where dreams are measured in scholarship opportunities and medical bills paid in full, anything seems possible. The hostile takeover documents arrive on Monday morning, delivered by courier to Evelyn Sterling's office, while she's reviewing safety improvement proposals with Liam and Eddie Morales. The legal papers are bound in burgundy leather, with the corporate letterhead of Meridian Capital Management, Richard Caldwell's investment, firm embossed in gold lettering that suggests both authority and finality. "What's this?" Liam asks, noting the sudden tension in Evelyn's expression as she scans the documents. "A coup," she says quietly, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal and inevitability. "Richard is calling an emergency shareholders meeting to remove me from leadership and install interim management that will restore fiscal responsibility to Horizon Plastics." Eddie sets down his coffee cup with the deliberate care of someone processing bad news. Can he do that? He controls 20% of the shares directly, and his investment network influences another 30%. If he can convince the institutional investors that my leadership represents a threat to returns, she doesn't finish the sentence, but the implication hangs heavy in the air. The documents detail a comprehensive case against Evelyn's recent decisions. The blank check to Liam described as reckless financial exposure. The profit-sharing program characterized as unsustainable largesse, and the scholarship funds dismissed as emotionally driven policies that compromise fiduciary responsibility. The language is precise, clinical, designed to frame compassion as incompetence. They're calling you recklessly sentimental, Liam reads from one page. Says your response to the fire incident demonstrates impaired judgment influenced by viral media rather than sound business principles. That's not the worst part, Evelyn replies, turning to a section titled Operational Efficiency Recommendations. Look at their proposed changes. The list reads like a blueprint for corporate regression: elimination of all recently announced employee benefits, return to minimum safety compliance standards, outsourcing of maintenance to reduce labor costs, and most damning, immediate termination of any employee whose recent publicity creates ongoing liability concerns. They want to fire you, Eddie says, the words coming out flat and angry. After everything you did, they want to fire you to protect themselves from positive publicity. Liam stares at the documents, understanding for the first time that heroism in corporate America isn't just unappreciated, it's actively dangerous. The viral video that made him temporarily famous has also made him a liability in the eyes of people who measure human value in quarterly reports. When's the meeting? He asks. Friday afternoon, 4 days to mount a defense against 15 years of relationship, building, and financial influence. Evelyn laughs bitterly. Richard has been planning this since Saturday night. The legal team, the financial projections, the investor presentations, you don't organize this kind of challenge overnight. So what do? We fight, she says, but her voice lacks conviction. We present our case to shareholders who've been conditioned to view worker investment as profit reduction. We explain why treating employees humanely is actually good business, even though the financial benefits won't show up in next quarter's earnings. The morning continues with a parade of phone calls from institutional investors, financial journalists, and board members choosing sides in what the Wall Street Journal is calling a battle for the soul of American manufacturing. Each conversation reinforces the same message. Evelyn's recent decisions are viewed as emotional overreach by a leader who's lost perspective. The pension fund managers are nervous, reports Marcus Webb during an emergency communications meeting. They're questioning whether Horizon can maintain competitive returns if we're setting precedents for industry-wide worker benefit increases. What about employee sentiment? Evelyn asks. How are the workers responding? Mixed. They appreciate the profit-sharing announcement, but they're also scared about job security if the takeover succeeds. No one wants to be seen as supporting changes that could get them fired. The cruel mathematics of power become clear as the day progresses. The workers who benefit most from Evelyn's policies have the least influence over the outcome, while the investors who see those policies as threats control the votes that matter. Democracy in corporate America flows upward to those with capital, not outward to those who create value. That evening, Liam drives to the factory for what might be his last shift as a Horizon employee. The parking lot buzzes with nervous conversation as workers debate the implications of the takeover attempt. Some see Evelyn's policies as too good to be true. Others worry that supporting them will mark them as troublemakers. What do you think's going to happen? Carmen Rodriguez asks during the shift change. If they fire you, what happens to the rest of us? I don't know, Liam admits, but I know we can't let fear make our decisions for us. Jorge Valdez approaches with his phone, showing a news article that's been shared across social media throughout the day. Look at this, it's not just about Horizon anymore. Other companies are being asked why they can't match our new worker policies. The business press is calling it the Ortiz effect. The article describes how Liam's viral heroism has sparked a national conversation about worker treatment in American manufacturing. Companies across the Midwest are facing pressure to explain pay disparities, safety protocols, and benefit structures that suddenly seem inadequate compared to Horizon's announcements. They're scared. Jorge continues. Not just our board, but boards everywhere. If Horizon proves that treating workers well actually improves performance, it makes every other company look heartless by comparison. The realization hits Liam like cold water. This isn't just about one factory or one owner's change of heart. The blank check and profit-sharing program represent a challenge to the fundamental assumptions that drive American corporate culture. If Evelyn succeeds, she'll prove that compassion can be profitably, and if she fails, the message will be that heroism has no place in modern business. We need to do something, Carmen says. We can't just watch them destroy the first boss who's ever treated us like human beings. What can we do? We don't have shares, we don't have money, we don't have power. We have something better, Liam says, an idea beginning to form. We have the story. Wednesday brings a development that changes everything. Rosie arrives home from school with a folder full of newspaper clippings and printouts that her teacher helped her compile. Dad, look at this. Other kids' parents are talking about the takeover at their companies too. The articles paint a picture of corporate America in turmoil. Shareholders at a dozen major manufacturers are demanding explanations for why their companies can't implement Horizon-style worker benefits. Union organizers are using Liam's story to push for better contracts. Even politicians are weighing in, with senators calling for hearings on corporate responsibility and worker safety. The governor's office called. Rosie announces proudly. They want to give you a medal at the state capitol, and they want it filmed so everyone can see. The lady said it would send a message about Wisconsin values. Liam realizes that what started as a simple act of courage has become a political symbol, a rallying point for people who believe that work should provide dignity along with wages. The hostile takeover isn't just about Horizon Plastics, it's about whether corporate America will embrace a more humane approach to business or reject it as financially unsustainable. Thursday's development is even more significant. Eddie Morales bursts into the break room with news that spreads through the factory like wildfire. The governor's announcing emergency legislation, the Workplace Hero Protection Act, says companies that retaliate against employees for life-saving actions will lose state contracts and tax incentives. The law is clearly written with Liam's situation in mind, but its implications extend far beyond one janitor's job security. It establishes the principle that heroism should be protected, not punished, that companies have obligations to workers that transcend quarterly profit calculations. Richard Caldwell's lawyers are going crazy, Eddie continues. They're saying the government can't interfere with private business decisions, but the governor's not backing down. Says Wisconsin won't do business with companies that fire heroes to protect share prices. By Thursday evening, the hostile takeover has evolved into something unprecedented. A public referendum on corporate values played out in real time across national media. The shareholders' meeting on Friday won't just determine Horizon's leadership, will signal whether American business is ready to prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term returns. Liam sits in his apartment that night, surrounded by legal documents he's trying to understand and media requests he's trying to manage. The blank check still sits on his kitchen table, undeposited and potentially worthless if the takeover succeeds. But beside it now are letters from workers at factories across the country, thanking him for proving that ordinary people can spark extraordinary change. Dad? Rosie's voice comes from the kitchen doorway, where she stands in her pajamas decorated with scientific equations. Are you going to the meeting tomorrow? I think I have to. People are counting on us to tell the truth about what really happened. What if they don't want to hear the truth? Liam thinks about the question. About boardrooms, full of people who measure human worth in spreadsheet cells and quarterly projections. About workers who've never had anyone speak for them in those rooms where decisions get made. Then we tell it anyway, sweetheart, because some things are more important than whether people want to hear them. Outside, the same storm clouds that brought the fire are gathering again, not violent this time, but persistent and determined. Tomorrow will determine whether one man's courage can inspire systemic change or whether corporate inertia will reduce heroism to a cautionary tale about the cost of caring too much. The hostile takeover documents lie scattered across the table like evidence of a crime that hasn't been committed, yet the crime of punishing compassion and rewarding indifference. But beside them, the blank check waits like a promise that some things in this world are still worth fighting for, even when the odds are calculated against you. Friday morning arrives with the weight of inevitability and the electric tension that precedes storms. Liam stands in his bedroom at 5 a.m., staring at the 2 sets of clothes laid out on his bed. His old work coveralls, still stained with smoke and chemicals from the night that changed everything, and a borrowed suit from Jorge's brother-in-law that almost fits his frame. The choice feels symbolic between the man he's always been and the man circumstances are forcing him to become. Rosie appears in the doorway, already dressed for school but carrying her science textbook like a shield against uncertainty. "Which one, Dad? I was hoping you'd tell me." She considers the options, with the seriousness of someone who understands that this decision matters more than fabric and fashion. "The coveralls," she says finally, "they show people who you really are." The shareholders' meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m. at the downtown Marriott, chosen for its neutral ground and capacity to accommodate the media circus that's gathered around what the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel is calling the battle for American manufacturing soul. By 8 a.m., news vans line the hotel's circular drive, and reporters practice sound bites about corporate responsibility and worker rights. Evelyn Sterling arrives at the hotel early, moving through the lobby with the purposeful stride of someone who's accepted that today will either validate her leadership or end her career. She's traded her usual business attire for something more modest, a simple grey dress that acknowledges the gravity of the moment without suggesting she's trying too hard to appear sympathetic. "Any word from the institutional investors?" she asks Marcus Webb, who's been fielding calls since dawn. The pension funds are still undecided. They like the optics of supporting worker benefits, but they're nervous about precedent and long-term returns. The hedge funds are splitsome, see this as progressive leadership. Others view it as fiscal irresponsibility. What about public sentiment? Marcus pulls up polling data on his tablet. 73% of Americans support your policies. But remember, Americans don't vote in shareholder meetings, investors do, and they're much more concerned about quarterly performance than public approval. The cruel arithmetic of corporate democracy becomes clear as the morning progresses. Popular support means nothing without voting shares. And voting shares belong to people whose primary concern is return on investment, not return on humanity. At Horizon Plastics, the day shift gathers in the break room to watch the proceedings on live television. Carmen Rodriguez has organized what she's calling a solidarity viewing, encouraging workers to wear their Liam-style coveralls as a show of unity. The gesture spreads through the factory floor, transforming the usual collection of work clothes into something approaching a uniform of resistance. "Whatever happens today," Carmen tells the assembled workers, "we've proved that ordinary people can make extraordinary change when we stick together. They can take away the profit sharing, they can fire Liam, but they can't take away what we've learned about our own worth." Eddie Morales nods from the back of the room. 3 days ago, management wouldn't listen to safety concerns. Today, we're in every newspaper in the country. That's not luck. That's what happens when someone has the courage to do what's right instead of what's safe. The morning's most significant development comes from an unexpected source. Governor Rebecca Martinez announces at a press conference that the state will be watching the shareholders' meeting closely, and that companies receiving public subsidies will be evaluated based on their treatment of workers, not just their financial performance. "Wisconsin believes in rewarding courage, not punishing it," she says, standing in front of a backdrop that reads, "Wisconsin values, work, family, community." Any company that retaliates against employees for protecting public safety will find it difficult to do business in our state. The governor's words carry more than political weight. They represent potential financial consequences that could affect Horizon's contracts and tax incentives. Suddenly, the shareholder vote isn't just about internal corporate governance. It's about the company's relationship with the state that provides its operating environment. At noon, Liam arrives at the Marriott, wearing his smoke-stained coveralls, the fabric still carrying faint traces of the chemicals that nearly killed him. The hotel lobby falls silent as he walks through not the respectful quiet reserved for celebrities, but the deeper hush that accompanies someone who's become larger than themselves without wanting to. Rosie walks beside him, dressed in her best outfit and carrying a handmade sign that reads, "My Dad the Hero," in careful 9-year-old handwriting. She'd insisted on coming, despite his concerns about exposing her to what could become a very public failure. "You sure about this, sweetheart? It might get ugly in there." "You were sure about going into the fire," she replies with logic that cuts through his anxiety. "Sometimes we have to do scary things because they're important." The ballroom that will host the shareholders' meeting is being transformed into something between a corporate boardroom and a courtroom. Rows of chairs face a raised platform where Evelyn will present her case for maintaining leadership, followed by Richard Caldwell's argument for why change is necessary. The setup suggests a trial, with shareholders serving as jury and the future of Horizon Plastics hanging in the balance. Media representatives fill the back half of the room, their cameras and microphones poised to capture what could become a defining moment in American labor relations. This isn't just about one company anymore. It's about whether corporate America is ready to embrace a more humane approach to business or reject it as financially unsustainable. "Mr. Ortiz," a young reporter approaches with the eager energy of someone who smells a career-making story. Jessica Chen from the Wall Street Journal. "Could I ask you a few questions about your expectations for today's vote?" "I expect people to do what they think is right," Liam says carefully. "That's all any of us can do. But what if right means different things to different people? What if shareholders believe that maximizing returns is their moral obligation?" The question cuts to the heart of the conflict. Liam looks around the ballroom, seeing shareholders in expensive suits studying financial projections, while workers in coveralls watch from the lobby through glass doors they're not allowed to pass. Two different worlds, operating by two different definitions of success. "I think right means remembering that behind every number on a spreadsheet is a real person with a real life," he says finally. "When that gets forgotten, that's when places catch fire." By 1:30, the ballroom is packed beyond capacity. Shareholders occupy the front sections, their voting power proportional to their investment rather than their numbers. Behind them sit employees, community members, and union representatives who have no vote but whose lives will be affected by the outcome. The division is stark. Those with financial stake seated comfortably, those with personal stake standing in the back. Richard Caldwell arrives with an entourage of lawyers and financial advisors, his presentation materials contained in leather portfolios that suggest both authority and expense. He moves through the room like a man attending his own coronation, shaking hands with institutional investors and offering reassurances about returning to proven business principles. "Liam," Evelyn appears beside him, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night, spent preparing for what could be her final act as Horizon's leader. "I want you to know that whatever happens today, what you did matters. You've shown people that ordinary workers can spark extraordinary change. What happens if you lose? Then we'll have proven that courage is worth more than compensation, even if the market disagrees." She pauses, watching Richard Caldwell work the room with practiced efficiency. "But I don't think we're going to lose." "Why not?" "Because you're not the only hero in this story. Look around." Liam follows her gaze and sees what he'd missed while focusing on his own anxiety. Dozens of workers wearing coveralls similar to his, their presence transforming the corporate gathering into something more like a movement. Carmen Rodriguez stands near the media section, her union credentials, giving her access to speak with reporters about worker perspectives. Jorge Valdez films everything on his phone, creating a real-time record of corporate democracy in action. They're calling them Liam's army, Evelyn continues. Workers from factories across the Midwest who drove here to show support for the idea that heroism should be rewarded, not punished. They can't vote, but they can witness. And sometimes, witnessing is enough to change hearts. The final surprise comes at 1:45, when Governor Martinez herself enters the ballroom, accompanied by state legislators and economic development officials. Her presence sends a clear message. Wisconsin is watching this vote, and the state's future relationship with Horizon Plastics may depend on the outcome. "I'm here as an observer," she announces to the gathered media. "But I want shareholders to understand that Wisconsin values companies that value their workers. Our tax incentives and state contracts reflect that priority." The political implications ripple through the room like electricity. Suddenly, the shareholder vote isn't just about internal corporate governance seats, about Horizon's relationship with state government, its eligibility for public contracts, and its access to the economic development programs that have supported its growth. As 2 p.m. approaches, Liam takes his seat in the front row beside Rosie, whose presence serves as a reminder of what's really at stake. This isn't about corporate philosophy or shareholder return sits, about whether a 9-year-old girl will grow up in a world where courage is celebrated or where it's too expensive to afford. The room falls silent as Evelyn Sterling approaches the podium. Behind her, a screen displays the Horizon Plastics logo alongside a photo from that night. Liam in his yellow helmet, silhouetted against flames, working frantically to save something larger than himself. The image has become iconic, but in this context it feels personal, a reminder that behind every corporate decision are real people facing real consequences. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn begins, her voice carrying across the packed ballroom. "Today we decide not just who leads Horizon Plastics, but what kind of company we want to be. The choice isn't between profitability and compassion, it's between short-term thinking and sustainable success." In the front row, Rosie squeezes her father's hand and whispers, "You're going to change everything, Dad, just like Mom said you would." Liam realizes that the scared janitor who entered a burning building 4 days ago no longer exists. In his place sits a man who's discovered that sometimes the most important transformations happen not in the fire itself, but in the aftermath, when ordinary people are forced to decide whether they'll accept the world as it is or fight to make it what it should be. The shareholders' meeting is about to begin, and with it, the final test of whether one man's courage can inspire systemic change in American corporate culture. The smoke-stained coveralls he wears carry more than chemical residue. They carry the hopes of every worker who's ever believed that doing the right thing should matter more than doing the profitable thing. Outside, storm clouds gather once again, but this time they promise not destruction, but the kind of cleansing rain that washes away what no longer serves and makes room for something better to grow. The shareholders' meeting begins with the formal procedures that govern corporate democracy motions and seconds, proxy statements, and voting tallies that reduce human drama to parliamentary process. But the tension in the Marriott ballroom transcends procedural formality, crackling with the electricity of a moment when ordinary business becomes something larger than itself. "The meeting will come to order," announces Patricia Hoffman, serving as interim board chair for these proceedings. Her voice carries the measured authority of someone who's overseen countless corporate transitions, but today feels different, weighted with implications that extend far beyond quarterly reports and stock valuations. Evelyn Sterling rises to present her case, moving to the podium with the purposeful stride of someone who understands that the next 30 minutes will define her legacy. Behind her, the presentation screen displays financial projections that tell 2 different stories: short-term costs and long-term benefits, immediate expenses and sustainable growth. 4 days ago, she begins, her voice carrying across the packed ballroom, This company faced a crisis that could have destroyed not just our facility, but the surrounding community. We were saved by the courage of an employee whose name most of us didn't know, whose story we'd never heard, whose value we'd never properly recognized. The room listens with the focused attention reserved for pivotal moments. Shareholders study their tablets and financial projections, but their eyes keep drifting to Liam in his smoke-stained coveralls, the living embodiment of the principles being debated. Liam Ortiz didn't risk his life because of profit, sharing programs or safety bonuses. He acted because that's who he is, a man who believes that doing right matters more than following protocol. But his heroism exposed something uncomfortable about our company, that we'd created conditions where someone had to choose between safety and courage. She clicks to the next slide, showing before and after photos of Section C, the neglected electrical systems, the offline sprinkler equipment, the deferred maintenance that nearly resulted in catastrophe. The images tell a story of corporate priorities made visible through infrastructure decay. The safety failures that triggered this crisis weren't accidents, they were choices. Choices to defer maintenance, to accept calculated risk, to prioritize quarterly margins over worker protection. We can't prevent every emergency, but we can eliminate the emergencies we create through negligence. Richard Caldwell shifts in his seat, his expression showing controlled impatience. His presentation folders contain different data market analyses and competitive benchmarks that frame Evelyn's proposals as financially reckless rather than morally necessary. The competing narratives will collide in the voting that follows, but for now, he waits his turn. The policies I've announced aren't gifts to workers, they're investments in sustainability, Evelyn continues. Profit sharing reduces turnover and increases productivity. Safety improvements prevent costly accidents and regulatory fines. Worker scholarships create the skilled labor force we need for future growth. She pauses, her gaze sweeping across the assembled shareholders. But even if these policies cost more than they save, even if they reduce margins and affect dividends, they represent something that should matter to anyone who owns a piece of this company. The recognition that our success depends on people, not just processes. The presentation shifts to employee satisfaction surveys, productivity metrics, and retention statistics that support her argument. But the most powerful evidence sits in the front row. Rosie Ortiz, holding her handmade sign, representing the next generation of workers who will judge companies based on values as much as valuations. My father built Horizon Plastics on the belief that business could be both profitable and humane. For 15 years, I've allowed market pressures to erode that foundation, convincing myself that global competition required abandoning local compassion. Liam's heroism reminded me that some principles shouldn't be negotiable. As Evelyn concludes her presentation, the ballroom erupts in applause, nor the polite recognition typical of shareholder meetings, but the sustained appreciation reserved for speeches that articulate something larger than self-interest. The workers in coveralls stand first, followed by community members, and finally some shareholders who seem surprised by their own emotional response. "Thank you," Patricia Hoffman says, calling for order. The board will now hear from Richard Caldwell, representing the concerned shareholders who requested this meeting. Richard approaches the podium with the confidence of someone who's spent 40 years making financial arguments to people who understand that sentiment doesn't pay mortgages or fund retirement accounts. His presentation materials reflect that experience detailed analyses, competitive benchmarks, and risk assessments that frame emotion as the enemy of sound business judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's managed billions in investor capital. "We're here today because Horizon Plastics faces a leadership crisis that threatens the foundation of shareholder value. In 4 days, this company has committed to expenditures and policies that could cost millions without guaranteeing returns." The screen behind him displays comparative data, showing how Evelyn's policies would affect Horizon's competitive position relative to other manufacturers. The numbers are stark: higher labor costs, increased safety expenditures, reduced margins that could affect the company's ability to compete with operations that maintain leaner structures. No one questions Liam Ortiz's heroism or the importance of worker safety, but good intentions don't justify poor business decisions. The policies announced this week weren't developed through proper analysis or board oversight. They were emotional responses to viral media pressure. Murmurs ripple through the shareholders section as Richard's presentation gains momentum. His arguments appeal to the practical concerns that drive investment decisions: market share, profit margins, competitive positioning in an industry where efficiency often determines survival. Evelyn Sterling inherited a profitable company with steady growth and manageable risk. In 4 days, she's transformed it into a social experiment that prioritizes worker satisfaction over shareholder returns. That's not leadership. It's self-indulgent idealism that jeopardizes everyone's investment. The competing visions couldn't be clearer. Evelyn's argument for sustainable humanization versus Richard's case for proven profitability. The shareholders must choose between long-term transformation and immediate stability, between moral leadership and financial certainty. Furthermore, Richard continues, the precedent being set here extends far beyond Horizon Plastics. If companies reward extraordinary individual actions with blanket policy changes, we're creating unsustainable expectations that could destabilize entire industries. In the front row, Liam feels the weight of being transformed from hero to liability in the space of a PowerPoint presentation. Richard's argument reduces his night of courage to a costly disruption of normal business operations, proof that heroism and capitalism operate by incompatible logics. The solution is clear, Richard concludes. We need leadership that recognizes the difference between appropriate appreciation and reckless generosity. Leadership that understands that our primary obligation is to shareholders who trusted us with their capital, not to employees who happen to capture media attention. The applause following Richard's presentation is more measured than what greeted Evelyn, but it carries the weight of institutional support. The pension fund managers and investment advisors nod approvingly at arguments that align with their fiduciary obligations and risk management protocols. As the formal presentations conclude, Patricia Hoffman announces the final phase of the meeting: open comments from shareholders before the vote. The next few minutes will determine whether Horizon Plastics becomes a model for corporate humanization or a cautionary tale about the cost of valuing people over profits. The shareholder voting ballot sits before each participant, a simple piece of paper that will determine not just Horizon's leadership, but whether American manufacturing is ready to embrace a more humane approach to business. In the balance hangs the future of 500 jobs, the dreams of workers' children, and the question of whether courage should be rewarded or managed as a public relations challenge. The storm clouds outside have grown darker, and the first drops of rain begin pattering against the ballroom windows, a reminder that change often comes with the cleansing force of nature, washing away what no longer serves to make room for something better to grow. The open comment period begins with the institutional investors, pension fund managers, and investment advisors whose fiduciary obligations require them to prioritize returns over sentiment. Their statements are measured, professional, focused on the mathematical realities that govern retirement funds and endowment portfolios. The Wisconsin Teachers Pension Fund appreciates the human element of this story, says Margaret Chen, whose gray suit and precise diction reflect decades of managing other people's retirement security. But our obligation is to the teachers counting on steady returns for their future. We need assurance that compassion won't compromise performance. Similar statements follow from other institutional holders, each acknowledging the emotional appeal of Evelyn's policies while questioning their financial sustainability. The language is careful, respectful, but the message is clear. Good intentions don't guarantee good investments. Then something unexpected happens. Carmen Rodriguez stands in the employee section, her voice cutting through the corporate formality with the directness of someone who's never learned to speak in euphemisms. You want to talk about returns? Let me tell you about returns. Patricia Hoffman looks uncertain. Employee comments weren't part of the planned agenda, but Carmen continues before anyone can object. I've worked at Horizon for 12 years. In that time, I've seen good people leave because they couldn't afford to stay. Smart people quit because their ideas didn't matter. Brave people give up because courage was seen as troublemaking. Her words carry the weight of lived experience, cutting through financial abstractions with the reality of daily work life. You want productivity? Try asking workers what needs fixing instead of telling them to work around problems. You want loyalty? Try treating people like they matter instead of like they're replaceable. The ballroom has gone silent, even the media representatives stopping their note-taking to listen. Carmen's unscripted honesty represents something rarely heard in corporate settings, the authentic voice of labor, speaking truth to capital. Liam didn't save that building for profit sharing or safety bonuses. He saved it because that's what good people do when everything's on fire. But the fact that you're debating whether to reward goodness tells you everything about why places catch fire in the first place. She sits down to spontaneous applause from the worker section, but more significantly, several shareholders are nodding, people who've perhaps forgotten that behind their investment portfolios are real facilities with real people facing real challenges. I'd like to speak, Liam says, standing slowly. His voice is quiet, but in the amplified silence of the ballroom, everyone hears him clearly. Patricia Hoffman checks her notes. Mr. Ortiz, you're not technically a shareholder, but he's the reason we're here, Evelyn interrupts. I think he's earned the right to be heard. Liam moves to the front of the room, his smoke-stained coveralls a stark contrast to the business attire surrounding him. He doesn't approach the podium, doesn't need the artificial authority of elevated positioning. Instead, he stands where everyone can see him clearly, a man who's become larger than himself without wanting to. 4 nights ago, I was nobody special. He begins. A janitor working double shifts to pay bills and keep my daughter in school. I cleaned floors and emptied trash cans and tried to stay invisible because invisible felt safe. He pauses, his gaze moving across the assembled shareholders. But when that fire started, I couldn't stay invisible. Not because I'm braver than anyone else, but because I knew what would happen if I didn't act. 800 people live in the apartments near our factory. 800 people who trust that the place where I work won't explode in the middle of the night. The ballroom is completely silent now. Even the reporters have stopped typing. Liam's honesty cuts through corporate rhetoric with the power of simple truth. I didn't think about profit margins or shareholder returns when I went into that fire. I thought about my daughter waking up to a neighborhood that wasn't there anymore. I thought about explaining to other parents why I chose the safe thing instead of the right thing. He looks directly at the institutional investors, speaking to them as people rather than fiduciaries. You're worried about returns on investment. I understand that I worry about returns too. Like whether working 2 jobs will return enough money to keep Rosie in school, whether doing right will return dignity instead of unemployment, whether courage will return hope or just more bills I can't pay. Margaret Chen from the pension fund is leaning forward now, her professional composure softened by recognition that this man represents the teachers and public employees whose retirements she manages. But here's what I've learned this week, Liam continues. Returns aren't just about money. They're about what we get back from the choices we make. Mrs. Sterling chose to treat workers like human beings, and she got back a workforce that would follow her anywhere. I chose to risk everything for people I'd never met, and I got back a community that believes in taking care of each other. Rosie stands up in the front row, her 9-year-old voice clear and certain. My dad's not asking you to choose between money and people. He's asking you to remember that people make the money. Without people like him, you don't have anything to invest in. The comment draws surprised laughter from parts of the ballroom, but also something deeper recognition that a child has articulated what the adults have been struggling to express. The relationship between capital and labor isn't adversarial if both sides remember their mutual dependence. Before we vote, Patricia Hoffman announces, we have one final speaker, Governor Martinez has requested to address the shareholders. The governor approaches the podium with the authority of someone who represents 6 million Wisconsin residents, many of whom work in factories like Horizon Plastics. Her presence transforms the corporate meeting into something larger, a test of whether business and government can align around shared values. I'm here because what happens in this room today affects every working family in Wisconsin. She begins. The choice you're making isn't just about one company's policies. It's about what kind of economy we're building for our children. She gestures toward Rosie, still standing beside her father. That little girl represents the future workforce of American manufacturing. She's brilliant, motivated, and raised by parents who believe that work should provide dignity along with wages. The question is whether we're creating an economy that deserves workers like her. The political implications become explicit as she continues. Wisconsin offers tax incentives and public contracts to companies that create good jobs, not just any jobs. We support businesses that treat workers as partners, not just production inputs. Today's vote will determine whether Horizon Plastics continues to earn that support. The governor's words carry more than political weight. They represent potential financial consequences that could affect Horizon's bottom line, regardless of shareholder preferences. Suddenly, the choice isn't just between competing corporate philosophies, but between different models of state-business partnership. I've met with Liam Ortiz and his daughter, the governor concludes. I've seen the kind of character that emerges when people believe their work matters and their courage will be recognized. That's the Wisconsin I want to build, where heroes are celebrated, not managed as public relations challenges. As she returns to her seat, the ballroom erupts in sustained applause. But the sound carries different meanings for different audiences: validation for workers, uncertainty for shareholders, and recognition that this vote has become about more than corporate governance. Patricia Hoffman calls for order and announces that voting will begin. The ballots are simple documents, but they carry enormous weight. A choice between Evelyn Sterling's leadership and new management that would reverse her worker-focused policies. Remember, Richard Caldwell says quietly to nearby shareholders, sentiment doesn't pay dividends. But across the room, Liam Ortiz adjusts his smoke-stained coveralls and takes his daughter's hand, representing something that transcends quarterly calculations. The belief that some things matter more than money, and that companies built on that foundation might just be the most profitable investments of all. The voting begins, and with it, the final test of whether American corporate culture is ready to embrace a more humane approach to business, or whether heroism will remain too expensive for the market to afford. 6 months later, the autumn sun filters through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly constructed Employee Recreation Center at Horizon Plastics, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine on that stormy night when everything began. Children's laughter echoes across the playground equipment installed where the old employee parking lot used to be, while their parents watch from picnic tables during their lunch breaks. Liam stands near the center of the park, wearing a clean set of coveralls with Safety Director embroidered where his name tag used to be. The title still feels strange after 6 months, but the work feels right, designing systems that protect people instead of just meeting minimum compliance standards. His office is in the same building where he used to push a mop bucket, but now the walls are covered with safety schematics and engineering consultations that have transformed Horizon into a model facility. "Dad, are you ready?" Rosie calls from the launch platform at the park's center, where a model rocket sits poised for its maiden flight. At 10 years old, she's grown into her intelligence with the confidence that comes from knowing her dreams are achievable. The rocket she's built incorporates renewable energy storage concepts she learned in the advanced STEM program that's no longer a financial burden for their family. 5 minutes, he calls back, adjusting the safety perimeter one more time. The rocket launch is the centerpiece of today's celebration, the 6-month anniversary of what the media dubbed the Horizon transformation. But for the workers gathered in the employee park, it represents something more personal. Proof that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they're given the tools and trust to succeed. Evelyn Sterling emerges from the main building, accompanied by a group of executives from other manufacturing companies who've come to study what Fortune magazine called the Ortiz model, a management approach that treats worker investment as the foundation of sustainable profitability. Her leadership survived the shareholder vote by a margin narrow enough to matter, wide enough to validate, and the 6 months since have proven that compassion can indeed be profitable. The quarterly numbers are in, she tells Liam, her smile carrying the satisfaction of vindication. Productivity up 18%, worker turnover down to historical lows, safety incidents reduced by 60%. Even Richard Caldwell admits the policies are working, though he claims it's because we're in an economic upturn. Maybe he's right, Liam says. Maybe treating people well only works when times are good. Or maybe times are good because we're treating people well. The transformation of Horizon Plastics has attracted attention from across the manufacturing sector. Companies that initially criticized Evelyn's policies as sentimental are now quietly implementing similar programs, discovering that worker loyalty translates into measurable performance improvements. The Horizon Standard has become a benchmark for progressive labor relations, proof that American manufacturing can compete globally without sacrificing human dignity. Carmen Rodriguez approaches with a clipboard full of signatures workers volunteering for the next phase of safety improvements. Her role as union representative has evolved into something more collaborative, working with management to implement changes rather than fighting for basic protections. The adversarial relationship between labor and capital hasn't disappeared, but it's been replaced by something more productive, mutual recognition of shared interests. The electrical upgrade in Section D is ahead of schedule, she reports. Eddie's team says they'll finish 2 weeks early, which means we can start the green manufacturing retrofit sooner than planned. The Green Manufacturing Initiative represents the next evolution of Liam's influence at Horizon. His suggestion to convert waste heat into renewable energy has attracted federal grant funding and positioned the company as a leader in sustainable production. The same facility that nearly exploded due to deferred maintenance is now being studied as a model for environmental responsibility. 5 minutes to launch, Rosie announces, her voice carrying across the park with the authority of someone who's learned that her ideas matter. The crowd gathers workers and their families, community members, local officials who've watched Horizon's transformation become a symbol of economic development done right. Eddie Morales joins them, his maintenance supervisor badge replaced by chief safety engineer, credentials that reflect his new role in designing the systems he once struggled to maintain. The electrical infrastructure that failed that stormy night has been completely rebuilt, but more importantly, the culture that allowed those failures has been transformed. You know what the best part is? Eddie says, watching families settle on blankets across the park lawn. It's not just the new equipment or the better pay. It's that people believe their work matters again. They come in thinking about improvement instead of just getting through the shift. As 2 o'clock approaches, Liam takes his position beside the launch platform where Rosie makes final adjustments to her rocket. The device represents more than science fair engineering. It embodies the dreams that become possible when communities invest in their children's potential. The scholarship fund established in her name has grown to support dozens of workers' children, creating pathways to higher education that were previously impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn addresses the crowd from a simple podium. 6 months ago, this company faced a crisis that could have destroyed everything we'd built. We were saved by the courage of one man who believed that doing right matters more than following protocol. Today, we launch not just a rocket, but a symbol of how high we can soar when we lift each other up. Governor Martinez steps forward to offer the ceremonial countdown, her presence representing state government's continued support for companies that prioritize worker welfare. The Workplace Hero Protection Act has become a model for other states, and Wisconsin's reputation as a destination for progressive manufacturing has attracted new businesses seeking skilled, loyal workforces. This rocket, the governor says, represents Wisconsin values in action. When we invest in people, when we reward courage, when we treat workers as partners, this is what becomes possible. Rosie stands beside the launch controls, her face serious with the responsibility of the moment. The model rocket she's built incorporates advanced materials and renewable energy concepts that would challenge college engineering students, but she approaches the task with the confidence of someone who's learned that big dreams are achievable through small, persistent efforts. 10. The crowd chants in unison, their voices carrying across the industrial district where other factories have begun implementing their own versions of the Horizon model. 9, 8, 7. Liam thinks about the night that started everything, the storm, the fire, the choice between safety and courage that transformed his life and the lives of everyone around him. The viral video that made him temporarily famous has been viewed more than 200 million times, but its real impact isn't measured in clicks or shares. It's measured in the faces surrounding him now, workers who believe their contributions matter, children who see their dreams as achievable, communities that trust in the possibility of positive change. 6, 5, 4. The jerry-rigged sprinkler bypass he created in desperation has been replaced by state-of-the-art fire suppression systems, but its symbolic importance remains. It hangs in a display case in the main lobby, accompanied by a plaque that reads, "Sometimes the most important solutions come from people who never stopped believing that broken things can be fixed." 3, 2, 1. Launch. Rosie presses the button and her rocket streaks skyward in a trail of controlled fire and perfectly calculated physics. The device arcs high above the factory complex, its parachute deploying at the optimal altitude to bring it safely back to Earth in the designated recovery area. The crowd erupts in cheers, but the applause represents more than successful engineering. It celebrates the journey from that night of crisis to this moment of triumph, proof that when ordinary people refuse to accept ordinary circumstances, extraordinary transformation becomes possible. As the rocket drifts down on its parachute, Liam wraps his arm around Rosie's shoulders and looks out over the employee park, where workers and their families celebrate not just a successful launch, but the knowledge that their workplace has become something worth celebrating. The storm clouds that brought the fire are long gone, replaced by clear skies that stretch toward a future built on the understanding that the most profitable investment any company can make is in the people who create its success. "What's next, Dad?" Rosie asks, already thinking about the next project, the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove that science and courage can solve any problem. "Whatever you want to build, sweetheart," he replies, knowing that in a world where heroism is rewarded instead of managed, where workers are treated as partners instead of production units, where dreams are supported instead of deferred, anything is possible. The model rocket touches down safely in the designated recovery area, its mission accomplished. But the real launch happened 6 months ago, when a janitor refused to accept that broken things can't be fixed, and a community learned that sometimes the most important changes begin with one person willing to risk everything for something larger than themselves.